You're about to watch a great interview on TYT Interviews. If you want to watch them live, members are the only ones who get to do that. tytnetwork.com/join. Become a member, enjoy the interviews as they happen.
Hey TYT, I'm Nomi Konst here in New York to talk about our favorite subject, the future of Democrats. They are, of course, supposedly the party that is supposed to be standing in the way of Trump, but there's some division and a little bit of a revolution happening internally. Where are we? What's going to happen? Mike Lux is a very well-known figure in the Democratic progressive world. He is on the board of pretty much every progressive organization. He's involved with the Congressional Progressive Caucus, or the Progressive Caucus, we should say. And he's the author of the new book, How to Democrat in the Age of Trump. That's the question we all want to know. Right before we came on camera, we were talking about the revolution, the state of the revolution. And it's not just that the Democrats have their own internal debates happening about who they are, where the soul is, who's the leader. You know, Senator Schumer a couple of days ago said he didn't know who the leader of the Democratic Party was. But there are also a lot of changes happening in government, which is essentially ruled by Republicans right now, Trumpian Republicans, that might affect how the left actually organizes. Given the state that we're in, teetering on authoritarian, maybe I can say that, how will the left be able to organize and get itself together when the first battle they seem to have is against Democrats, but then there's this bigger battle, which is the Trump administration?
Yeah, I argue in the book that what Democrats need to do to start winning again is to listen to the grassroots and to connect with working people of all races, of all regions. We don't have to pick and choose between black people and Hispanic people and white people. All of that is bullshit. The Democratic Party for too long has been afraid to take on hard issues, has been afraid to really have the courage to just like call it like it is. And I think we as a party need to get back to the idea that we're going to represent everybody in the working class, everybody in the middle class. We're going to represent people in rural areas. But we're going to represent folks in the cities as well, and that we're going to bring people together around economic issues, the way Bernie did, the way Elizabeth Warren has been doing, the way those kinds of candidates have done. And if we do that, and if we listen to people at the grassroots, we can start being a winning party again. If we don't, it's going to be very hard because people are looking for outsiders, right? That's why Trump got elected. They love the fact that he's an outsider. They might not like all the stuff he does or says, but they like the fact that he's shaking the system up, that he's breaking the China, that he's rattling the walls. You know, they like all that. And we need to be the party of insurgency. We need to be the party of the grassroots and the party that's going to say, okay, no more business as usual. And once we get back to that, I think we start winning again.
Senator Joe Manchin, just a couple of days ago, of course, he is one of, if not the most conservative member of the Democratic caucus in the Senate. He came out and said that he was potentially thinking about supporting Trump. Donald Trump, Joe Manchin, who is from West Virginia, and I think the argument has been, well, we need him to caucus with the Democrats because we need to get those numbers, but in the end, he doesn't vote with Democrats on many important issues, especially those involving economics and environmental issues and pretty much anything, to be honest.
Well, there's always going to be certain Democrats like Manchin who are from red states and whose philosophy is that I've got to be as conservative a Democrat as I can be in order to win. Now, I'm from a red state. I'm from Nebraska. I worked in Iowa, which has been a swing state but went strongly for Trump. I think the way you win, short-term and long-term, in states like that is you reach out to people on economic issues and you be a populist and you be a progressive populist. And I think that's how I've seen Democrats win in those states for the most part. Manchin, is an interesting guy. He's infuriating on many different levels. But, I mean, he did vote with us on the tax bill. He did vote with us on health care. And he has some instinctual kinds of things, like he and Van Jones, for example, worked together on coal miners' pensions. So he has some things that where he's still a Democrat, but I think he's really playing hard to this kind of I'm kind of like Trump, even though I'm a Democrat, and that's his idea of strategy right now. And I have a deep skepticism about whether that kind of thing works, because he's going to depress his own base and his own turnout, and people don't like politicians who don't, it's not clear where they stand, what they stand for.
Republican light is not going to necessarily work for him. He needs to figure out how to be the Joe Manchin and who Joe Manchin is.
Yeah, and maybe he's going to go the other way on certain issues, but you can still be a progressive populist and fight for working people, which is what he ought to be doing. And we all know Trump is not fighting for working people. So anyway, I think that. I think Manchin is playing very loose, and it could well bite him in the ass.
These debates are playing out in the press. They're not happening behind closed doors. Sometimes they are. They're definitely getting leaked. They're happening, during committee meetings and commissions with the Democratic Party. There are actual debates on TV about this. Between town halls on CNN are dedicated to the future of the Democratic Party. It seems like people now realize that economic issues are what transcends. I mean, the working class is arguably larger than it's been in decades. Poverty is higher than it's ever been.
Absolutely right.
So, does the case even need to be made anymore? I mean, people seem to get it, but why aren't they changing?
Well, I think the case does need to be made, because too much of the Democratic leadership in D.C. is still not getting it. I think part of it is money, right? I mean, we all know that contributions from big donors matter. So part of it is that, and I think part of it is just like a very old and stale conventional wisdom. Oh, the way you win is you move to the middle. And then the middle, what is the middle? I actually sometimes call it the DC middle, which is like a world that no one else lives in. The DC middle is like, oh, let's do a grand bargain to cut Social Security. That'll excite people. No. I mean, that kind of stuff is just dumb. It's just dumb politics. There is this conventional wisdom that kind of mesmerizes some Democrats. Fortunately, there are a lot of them that are pushing back against that. And I mean, you look at what Elizabeth Warren did on Social Security. Before she got to the Senate, Obama kept talking about the grand bargain to cut Social Security. After she got to the Senate and pushed the issue, she ended up getting 44 out of 46 Democrats to vote with her on expanding Social Security benefits. So you can use these issues and pivot off these issues and put Democrats in a position where they like, oh, okay, we have to do that. And I think that's part of what good organizing is. That's part of what progressives have to do for the Democrats' own good, is to push them on these economic issues.
There was an election on Tuesday in several states, California, New Jersey. The press made it sound like progressives were not winning and the Democratic establishment was maintaining control. Is that true?
No, I think it's much more complicated than that. For one thing, if you look at the dynamics in those races, most of the Democrats have actually shifted to the left because they see that's where the wind's blowing. So even if Dianne Feinstein won big, right, and she did, in the initial, two-way, the fact is that she moved so far to the left over the last 6 months because she knew she had to. First of all, it's complicated by that. Now, she's an establishment figure. Once the election's over, she'll probably move back to the center. You see people sort of having to move, so that's one thing. But the second thing is you can't paint things with a broad brush. You look at a district like the one where Katie Porter won the Democratic slot. Katie Porter is an Elizabeth Warren Democrat. She was mentored by Elizabeth Warren and supported by Elizabeth Warren, and she beat a conventional, much more conventional Democrat who the party establishment had supported. It's really a district by district thing. Not very long ago, was it a week or maybe two, there was a primary in my home state of Nebraska, and a strong progressive woman coming from the grassroots ended up beating a former congressman in the primary who was trying to take his seat back, who had been supported by all the party establishment, at least in D.C. It was actually more mixed in Nebraska. And she beat him, running a great race. He outspent her, you know, all those things. But she ran a grassroots-oriented race, and she won. You look at Kentucky, where Amy McGrath beat the mayor of Louisville. I mean, big position, a lot of money. DCCC had recruited him to run, and she won a decisive victory. So, and look, not every primary is one where progressives are going to win. You know, we have a divided party, and there's lots of money on the other side. I do think that Democrats are seeing the wind blow, and they're seeing that they have to move to the left. And I have told certain progressive people who cannot be named, who may run for president, maybe, that everybody's going to sound like these couple of people in the race coming up, but of course, but then they'll have the big money folks attack them, you know, with ads. But they will sound just like, I think most of the Democratic field is going to sound like Bernie sounded last time, like Elizabeth Warren sounds on economic issues. So I think we have this dynamic where I think folks like me and like you want the true progressives to win, but the fact that the party sees like, oh, we gotta move on some of these issues is a good sign. It's a sign that things are moving in the right direction.
One thing that has been repeated quite a bit over the last couple of years is the state of the Democratic Party just as an institution. You know, it's lost now near 1,200 seats. You know, it's winning some back, but whether or not they're responsible for that is different. You know, as an institution, it used to operate, you know, a little over a decade in every single state under Howard Dean. They would invest in state parties and recruit candidates. Imperfect, but at least, you know, they won back the House in 2006. As an institution, you know, it's struggling, and at a moment when we really should be organizing and uniting, there are all these other organizations that are popping up on the outside of the Democratic Party. And I've heard mixed opinions on this. If there's anybody I'm going to ask, it's you, because you are on the board of every organization out there. You know, you see these organizations, and some are doing the Eric Holder and President Obama's organization. They're arguably doing some of the work that the DLCC should be or would be doing, but it's not receiving the funds. And so the funds are being redirected in different places. Is this good or is this bad? Some of it's, you know, C4s, you can't track the money. What does that all mean?
Well, you know, like anything in politics, it's complicated. It's not all good or bad. There are aspects of it I don't like and aspects I do. I argue in the book, though, that the outside groups are necessary. You can't do everything within the Democratic Party. For one thing, just on issues you can't, you know, on lobbying and that kind of thing. So you need outside forces. But the other thing is the party structure gets kind of, morose. It gets kind of like hard to change. And you have people who've been doing it for 1,000,000 years who keep the power. And so you have to have outside groups who kind of come in and push and pull and build their own base. You know, in politics, you have to have your own base of power, and I think so. I think the outside organizing is going to strengthen the party. I think the fact is that in the last decade, and you know, I talk in my book about some of the mistakes that the Obama folks made. I think he did some good things too. It wasn't all bad, but the fact is that Obama never really cared that much about the Democratic Party as an institution. And you could tell it from the way he talked. I mean, he talked about both Democrats and Republicans have problems on these issues and blah, blah, blah. He literally tried to separate himself from being a Democrat at times. And he turned the DNC over to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and then neither got rid of her when she wasn't doing a good job or supported her either way. So, I mean, he didn't really care about the party as an institution. They built OFI outside of the party, and I talk about that in the book. So I think we do have to get back to rebuilding the party as well as outside organizing, and I think you can do both. Mm-hmm. And I think the best way to do things is to do both. You look at what Keith Ellison has done as deputy chair. He's gone all over the country meeting with outside groups at the local level, which is something I think all the party committees ought to be doing. They need to be hearing from the grassroots. One of the biggest problems we have is that we don't pay enough attention to the grassroots. We don't, party leaders don't have a genuine dialogue with grassroots folks and don't respect their opinion enough. So when you see Keith going out and doing that, that to me is what the party needs to be doing. And that's how you build the party as well as the outside.
Some are discussing, and some are completely in denial about, is the majority of Americans are independent leaning. And if you're looking at millennials, those under the age of 38, and whatever the next generation is that's going to be voting in 2 years, they're overwhelmingly independent and they're progressive leaning.
Yes.
There's an opportunity here to bring in these potential voters who are clearly very energized and active right now. Yeah. But in many states, New York is a great example. There's other states where it's very hard to be a Democrat, like actually be a Democrat. And even if you are an independent and you want to maintain your independence, the Democratic Party is not welcoming to that. I'm not going to speak on behalf of Republicans, but there's two sides to this I want to discuss with this generation, because there's number one, that they're independent leaning and they're skeptical of institutions. They're also progressive. They're also most economically affected. And so going back to the beginning of our conversation about those who leaned towards Trump or voted for Trump, they're still older. You have a generation that's younger and is not seems to be questionable of Trump's, hopefully. Hopefully that doesn't change anytime soon. So how are the Democrats going to see this opportunity where you have an anti-Trump demo that's working class, frankly?
Absolutely.
Economically disadvantaged, wants to be engaged, but has nowhere to, they're not welcomed. They're just not welcomed.
Well, and obviously those of us in the Democratic Party have to change that. If we don't change that, we die. One of my friends kidded me after reading my manuscript. He said the title ought to be read this book or the donkey dies. And I do think the Democratic Party in 10 years will be dead if we don't embrace that progressivism at the grassroots, if we don't bring in people who right now are not as interested. And we have to stop being a top-down party. I talk a lot about that. That the party leaders in D.C. make decisions about, that candidate in that district out here is going to be better. The party needs to get out of the business of being a top-down party and of telling people what to do in their own home turf. Of course, they should train people. Of course, they should give advice. But to say, we're going to deny you all the money if you don't do things exactly as we say and hire the exact consultants we want you to hire, and that's just craziness. One other thing, since we're sitting here in New York, and I talk about this in the book too, the exact opposite of what should be going on is Cuomo.
I'm sorry, are you speaking music to my ears? This is my favorite topic. Do you have another hour and a half? Okay. Right.
The bullying of progressives is an outrage. And by the way, I think he just destroyed any chance he ever had of being president. Because I grew up in Nebraska, but I did Iowa politics for 10 years. Iowa Democrats don't have any use for bullies. I mean, I think they will reject him out of hand. I think New Hampshire which went for Sanders last time, they're the same way. I think Andrew Cuomo just killed himself. He should have just run the primary and had a debate and he should have done what Feinstein did, moved to the left. But instead, he's going to bully people. That to me is insanity, and that's the exact opposite of what the party ought to be doing. So short term, maybe he wins this primary, but I tell you something, he's just screwed himself over the long term.
I hope that's the case, but as a student of Andrew Cuomo and the Democratic Party, I find it fascinating that he shares consultants with his lead advisor, SKD Knickerbocker, Jennifer Cunningham, who is, strangely enough, Eric Schneiderman's ex-wife, but former Attorney General. She had one of the largest contracts and is a constant role in the Democratic National Committee. He is now very involved, whether it's with his own operators. He's very involved in the makeup of the DNC, the membership. He controls the entire DNC vote in New York, parts of probably Connecticut with Dan Malloy, and you can go down the rabbit hole of the consultants. But there is a real story here in how the sausage is made in the Democratic Party. And I've heard this argument before that, he's not going to play well in Iowa. Well, number one, he operates a lot like Trump. One story, next story, we forget about it by the time we're 2 years from now in Iowa. Second part of it is Secretary Clinton didn't necessarily have the most, the people who become president don't always have the most Iowa-friendly personalities. So I feel like if with $31 million that is not being spent on his primary, maybe $1 million of that is, which he'll make up in 2 dinners,
right.
That he is the lead contender, but he's operating very similarly to what happened in 2016. Shut out the progressives, give interviews to certain. It's almost a mix of Trumpian style politics and Clintonian campaign strategy.
Yeah.
To win.
Well, he is smart in that kind of way, but I think the Democratic Party is moving away from that kind of politics at the grassroots level. At the leadership level, we still have those kinds of problems, but at the grassroots level, I mean, I just did a trip to Iowa not that long ago, and people are not in the mood for that kind of thing. I mean, there's the classic sort of mix of should Bernie run again, and what do you think about Biden, what do you think about this and that and the other, but nobody out there liked Cuomo. Nobody. So maybe he doesn't compete in Iowa and just competes in New Hampshire. Is he really going to won the state that Bernie won so easily? So then you go down south. I don't see Andrew Cuomo playing down south. I mean, Hillary had something that I think no candidate in the next election is going to have, which is that she had a 25-year relationship with the African American community, with the leadership of the community, with name ID, with all of those kinds of advantages, and there was some loyalty there. No candidate will have that.
And in 2008.
Right.
So she had to make up for it in the 8 years.
Exactly. And so I think that you're going to see a very different kind of race. I think it's going to be more wide open, and I think it's going to be more progressive. I also think if you look at the way progressives talk about race and class, we can make a link. And I think this was one of the things that Bernie didn't do in the last election, is he didn't figure out how to bring race and class together in the same conversation. But there's a growing body of research on that. Demos Action has done a brilliant new study with Anat Shanker Osorio and Celinda Lake and others, where if you actually lead with the race issue, if you lead with people saying, you know what, Trump's trying to divide us on race, and you know why? Because he's trying to pick our pocket. And you start the economic conversation with that. You open the door with that conversation. Then I think it helps you both with people of color, but also it's like being honest with white working class folks. And our party needs to do more of that. We need to take tough issues like race, deal with them head on, deal with them up front, rather than like, oh, well, let's never talk about race with white working class folks. You don't win elections by not talking about tough issues. And we've tried before, God knows. It's a way to lose.
Ben Jealous, the former president of NAACP, who's running for governor of Maryland, one of his stump speeches, he talks about being on the road with Bernie, and they sent him to, I believe it was West Virginia. And he goes, what am I going to do in West Virginia? And he gets up and he does his stump speech about racial injustice, and he sees two coal miners, white guys, get up and start cheering at the top of their lungs, right in the front row. And that was a moment, he says it really hit him that there's something else happening here. And when you talk about these issues, it really affects everybody.
Well, and if you talk to Reverend William Barber, he talks about this too. He talks about he's got a classic story that I'm sure you've probably heard him talk about, where he goes to like the whitest county in North Carolina, hardcore Republican county, and literally like wondering, are they bringing me out here to hang me? Like that kind of nervousness. But they welcomed him with open arms, and they welcomed his message with open arms, and he became friends with those folks. You see it in Van Jones' work, where he goes out into rural communities that have been hard hit by the industrial demise of certain industries, and having those conversations. I think progressives, that's what we need to do. I mean, part of my book is a call to progressives to change some of what we've been doing. We need to stop ignoring rural America. We need to stop ignoring white working class folks, but we need to bring them in and be upfront with them about where we are, and work with them, and organize. I mean, part of this is just like old-fashioned. You
Stole the words from my mouth. I was going to say, the strategy hasn't changed, but somehow we went off strategy. Meet people where they are. Exactly, the economy's stupid.
Exactly. And I talk about that in my book, that we lost our way in the 90s. And I was part of the Clinton administration. I was kind of the left edge of it, but I was part of the Clinton administration. We lost our way because we got too interested in big business rather than in working people, small business, folks at the local level. And Bill Clinton was enough of a charmer that he was able to sort of overcome that sense of going close. But I can remember in the early days of the Clinton White House, we would be having policy discussions, and President Clinton would say, the problem with what you're proposing is, I know Jimmy down the street. He works at the local factory, and I think this would really screw him. I don't want to do that. Or he'd say, Johnny, who runs the gas station at the corner of blah blah blah. I mean, he was very in touch with working class folks then, and we were like, I mean, his first rule of business in terms of the business community was let's help small business, right? But as the years went on, we lost our way. We got more and more in bed with big donors. We got more and more in bed with big business. We started deregulating major industries like media and Wall Street. And when that happened, we kind of forgot what the Democratic Party is supposed to be. And we're supposed to be the party of working people. We're supposed to be the party of the people. I mean, that's how we started, and that's what we were for many years. And we lost that, and we got to get it back. And we got to go back to old-fashioned organizing, and you can do it through social media. We were talking about this before. You can do it through Facebook. You can do it through YouTube. You can do it through Twitter and Snapchat and all those other things. But you can also just like talk to your friends, go door to door, make a telephone call, hand out flyers at church. You can reach to people a lot of different ways. But it's really important for people to talk to their friends and to talk to their family and to make this personal and do that kind of person-to-person organizing.
You're at the intersection of political thinking and philosophizing and also organizing, but technology too. And so I guess my last question for you is probably tough to answer at this point, but you talk about the role of big money in politics, and I often hear Democratic leaders who are resistant to letting go of the existing strategy of keeping lobbyists in and these big donors, is that they need to compete with Republicans. But in the end, when you look at a campaign budget, now granted, it costs money to run a campaign, especially in a big state like California or New York.
Does, yeah.
So much of it has to do with the media markets and buying ads on TV. Now, there's lots of ways to watch TV now, and ads still cost money, but undoubtedly, the ad industry, the cost of buying ads is not going to be as expensive as it used to be, because not everybody's watching primetime TV at 9 p.m. anymore, and also, people kind of tune them out.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Are we just, as a party, resistant to spending less money? There are candidates who are winning with way less, campaign funds, and they're beating the big boys. Do you think there's going to be a pivot, and is that going to affect the soul of the party?
Well, I think there's two parts to the answer. One is we can raise money from the grassroots. Mm-hmm. Bernie proved that in his presidential campaign. Elizabeth Warren went up against a popular, charismatic, well-liked, moderate guy in Massachusetts who had money up the yin-yang from Wall Street and all these other interests who hated Elizabeth Warren. She ended up raising $40 million, most of it from the grassroots, right? More than any Senate candidate that year. And she actually outraised Scott Brown in spite of all his money from Wall Street. She did it from the grassroots. So Bernie, was outraising Hillary by the end of the campaign, all from the grassroots. If we have candidates that run on strong issues and that fire people up and that turn people on, we can raise money from the grassroots that will substitute for all the big money stuff that the Republicans raise. So that's the first half. In terms of the question of actually what
the future.
In terms of the sort of the TV and I argue in the book. I don't argue that we shouldn't spend any money on TV. I think TV still has a role, but I argue in the book that there was a time that TV was king, and that it dominated campaign budgets. People always spent too much on it, but there was a justification for spending more. These days, you want a far more diversified campaign plan, far more diversified budget. You don't have to spend as much on TV. You can spend more on social media. You can spend more on organizing, more on voter registration. All of those things matter just as much, if not more, than TV. And so the whole philosophy of campaigns needs to change, and it doesn't need to be as big money oriented as it used to be.
We have so many candidates who are running at the local level and depending on those small dollar donations. So hoping that that people are learning how to donate in different ways and become longtime donors to strong candidates, whether they win the first time or not.
Absolutely, and at the local level as well as the big national flashy wins. People should contribute at the presidential level or at the Senate level, but I would really encourage the folks who are TYT folks, really look at those local races and look at the up and coming candidates, the young candidates, the grassroots folks. That's the future. That's the future, and we ought to be investing in those people right now.
And they don't always win the first time, but don't feel disheartened.
Exactly.
And that's I'm seeing a lot of that in the news, but most people.
Exactly. Sometimes they do win, but you're absolutely right. Let's invest in the future. These are up and coming folks. They're going to win in the future, and they are the future of the Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
If you liked this interview and you're at the end, so apparently you liked it a little bit, thank you for watching. We really appreciate it. You can watch them live as they happen if you're a member. Only members get that. Go to tytnetwork.com/join. And you get not only interviews live, you get the Young Turks live, you get Aggressive Progressive live, Old School, and all of it commercial free. Come join us right now, tytnetwork.com/join.